Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our final segment of live coverage from MUFON 2022 at their symposium here in Denver, Colorado. UFOs in the spotlight, UFOs, UAPs in the media has been the theme of this year's show. And one of the themes we've been talking about is the importance of shows like MUFON here, Tom, because as opposed to, and we had the discussion earlier today over breakfast, the fact of a lot of these shows tend to be more pop culture centered,
right,
whereas this one is much more research centered and much more scientifically centered. And the one thing that I love about MUFON having someone like you here is, A, you're an experiencer.
Yep.
B, you actively have experience with the opposite side of MUFON, which is MUFON investigating.
Way back when.
Well, your actual family's case. So, your family famously saw what is known as the Berkshire's UFO.
Which was a rebrand.
Yes,
it's
totally
rebrand. The Reed family incident.
Exactly.
And then they renamed it. So when I get here, they're like,
air quotes, because that's what most people know it as.
Yeah. I actually had people here asking me if I was familiar with the Berkshire's UFO. Yeah, I'm like, that is my freaking case. So, you know what I mean?
You wait till you see my presentation.
So things get lost.
I actually have right here in my hand a copy of the certificate from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. What makes your case so historic is the fact that it is the only one recognized by a historic society, the only one shown to be like, this is an actual event that happened. We acknowledge it.
Yeah, let me comment on that. It actually isn't the only one recognized. You know, McMinnville's recognized. Betty and Barney Hill as well. They're recognized by the Historical Society as well. But this is the very first case to be officially archived into state as historically true. So that, to me, it opens doors for other people. And I don't even live there. You know, the park that I have in 1,000 miles away. But there's a very interesting, aspect and background to how that happened. Because people ask me all the time, how did you get inducted into state?
Exactly.
And they don't realize that, there's so many stories, right? When you talk to people, they don't know what to believe.
Yeah.
They hear so much crap. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, whatever. Good seeing you. They shake hands. But my father was a politician. My grandmother was the governess for Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandchildren in Cherry Hills, Colorado. And my mother was on radio. We were New Yorkers who moved into a small town, so we're kind of outsiders there. So there was some friction. And
from away, as they would say.
Yeah. My father was an attorney. So being an attorney, he documented everything. And when he had his opportunity to do something with it, which he promised my mother he would, right about that time, he was contacted by Robert Blechman, who in 1992 was the public relations director for MUFON. And because, he was an attorney working, they knew each other, he approached my father to see if they could mention, the incident in Sheffield, because it was over a body of water, just like the Hudson River Valley sightings were, which was what he was keen on at the time, and to see if what was happening in the Berkshires with regard to all the space race and the money being filtered into like Sprague Electric and GE to make these,
all the independent contractors up there.
And the goodwill message that went to the moon. Those guys used to come in our diner and they knew my parents. So you've got a very unique element that most people don't have. I mean, you have government-funded money, and those working on those projects eating in our diner and then placing this medallion on the moon or this goodwill message on the moon. And then you had the mining from Canaan, Connecticut, which, the magnesium that was mined there was sent to Oak Ridge back in the day for the atom bomb. You had so many things happening that it was just, and Robert Blechman's eyes was like, my God, maybe there's some of this filtered over to the Hudson River. And then when my father lost his life on the anniversary of that symposium at the UN, where our case was mentioned, it's in support of Cash and Landerman and the Hudson River Valley. Ours was not a highlighted case. It was just in support of.
Because the Cash Landrum incident was huge. Huge. I mean, I grew up with that being Texas. From Texas. I mean, literally, it was right down the road from where my family lived.
No kidding.
Not even joking. Right down the road from my grandmother's house in Kennewick
I'd like to see what that
the
was.
highway.
I'd love to see it sometime.
It's pretty incredible. And yeah, like that was one of those that when I learned about that later in life, it was like, whoa, this happened like right in my backyard growing up as a kid.
Wow.
And what was it like for you on the experiencer end to see all of this, to see these cogs in motion with your family, specifically with investigation and everything else? Because I think that's where really you can provide an interesting lens as an experiencer, is from the opposite end of the UFO investigation.
Okay, from the investigative side.
Well, yeah, and from having your case investigated by folks like MUFON.
So it's been investigated more than once.
Oh,
it was
sure.
investigated by the Roswell Research Library. You know, they had some people talk to us and work with us. And then it was investigated, by Robert Blechman, which is in the MUFON newsletters from, way back when.
Yeah.
And they've rewritten segments about that. And then again, it was researched by the Historical Society in Massachusetts. So it's been investigated like 3 times. To be honest with you, the most thorough was the Historical Society when there was a woman by the name of Debbie Kessler. She was an attorney, or her husband was an attorney. They owned a law firm. And she was really the paralegal for the law firm. She was the attorney's wife. But she was costing a lot less than her husband.
Yeah.
So she worked on the investigation along with a Debbie Smith in Connecticut, because we lived in Connecticut. So they tied in an investigator from Connecticut and an attorney's law firm to look at all the paperwork that I had in the documents that my father had in an attaché case following his passing on the same day, or this anniversary of the symposium in New York. And so, they handled these papers, but they did, if I were to say, slap a stack of papers in front of you and ask you, do you think these are legit or copies or fakes, you really don't know. So it was their job to research those papers and documents to make sure that what my father had and what we were going to use as some of the material or those source documents that they kept referring to make sure that this was legit. This actually did happen. And then following that, they asked me to take a polygraph test, which I did, and I passed. And then on top of that, they reached out to the radio station, WSBS Radio, that broadcast the incident back in 1969. And luckily, they had also rebroadcast some of those calls from other witnesses from the Great Barrington, Stockbridge area. And although they couldn't find them at the time, Tom Jay's wife is still alive today, who was the radio personality's wife at the time. She gave testimony along with about 250 other people calling the station. And, with everything, going on back in the 60s and being a small community, a lot of those people still live there.
Yeah.
So a lot of the children that were riding around on those banana seat bikes having, French fries in a restaurant and dropping quarters in a jukebox, they were bankers, they were historians. And even there's a Judge Titus. He is a judge in the 30th District Court. He knew our incident from way back when, because he actually had seen the cattle mutilations that took place on the same day, which has yet never to be included in any show that we've ever done.
Wow.
Yeah, there were 2 cows.
Now, how old were you when this incident happened?
That's another thing. Fox said I was 6. Ancient Alien said I was
10.
How
old do you say you were?
Well, because 10-year-old Tom sounds better than 9-year-old Tom, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
But
sure.
then, Jesse Waters.
10-year-old would be much more credible.
Yeah, those 2 months made a world of difference.
Yeah.
And so, so that's all over the spectrum. But I was almost 10 years old.
And how old were you at the time of the polygraph?
Oh, that was 2000. I think it was 2010 or 12.
Wow, even that many years
later.
Wait,
I'm sorry. It was the Historical Society wanted me to take it, so it was right around the time that they were investigating it.
Okay.
So they actually called a detective. They reached out. I don't know how they reached out, email, whatever, but they reached out to a detective where I live, and they had me going down to the Department of Defense Polygraph Institute in Tennessee.
Wow, the DOD Polygraph Institute.
Wow. It's actually on YouTube, and there's some of so he actually went back and read reenactment. He couldn't believe I passed it, right? So a TV show asked to speak with him, and you can actually see part of that. And, so he was blown away. He was shocked I passed it, Detective Morris. And he was an active detective at the time, too. So it was pretty intimidating. I'm wrapped up in all these things. I had to do like an hour.
Period, whenever you take one, it's intimidating.
Well, I was like, yeah, I'll take it. And I had to pay for it.
Oh, yeah.
They asked me, it was
Yeah, yeah.
$800.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting here, okay, go ahead. Just like the behavior panel, and stuff, other people that have interviewed me, the only way to really prove you're telling the truth is to go for it,
Yeah.
Because if you really are telling the truth, the polygraph should tell you.
That's right.
And and then the behavior panel, a lot of people say, oh, man, I wouldn't do that. You're crazy. I'm like, if they are as good as they say,
yeah,
then they're going to know I'm telling the truth.
Yeah, if they can tell micro expressions and everything else and tell the fact that, no, he is uncomfortable right now and he's telling a lie by his body language, like despite what the polygraph says.
I think it was a nice, a nice layer.
Oh, absolutely. It's another layer of evidence because polygraphs are great, but maybe admissible in court.
That's what happens.
And that's just it, and that's why you go to the other experts.
You can pass a polygraph test if you really believe it happened. Jesus Christ, I've been talking about this my whole life.
Yeah.
And then people say, oh, did you take regression? Well, you know what? I've been talking about this since I was 9 years old, 10 years old. You would think I was taking I was going through regression when I was in, 4th grade. Let's
talk about your experience that night. What did you witness?
Wow. Okay. Here's another something I want to lay out first. A lot of the shows have shown different parts of what we saw. Discovery Channel showed a large craft going over our car. Ancient Aliens, although I have a lot of respect for them, showed a light stopping our car. Okay, neither one of those ever happened. So when I do these talks, is to clear this up.
Yeah, you got to demystify.
And a part of that is because there were 3 objects, and the shows focus on one of them.
Okay,
it's not like they're really wrong.
Sure. It wasn't all of it.
Yeah, they just focus on parts, and that's kind of what makes this case so bizarre to people or confusing. And then you're trying to tell people on a radio show, oh, this happened or that happened. It doesn't jive with the last TV show.
Yeah.
And so that's why I come to these events. So we came through this bridge, and it was creepy on its own. I think I showed a picture of it. I mean, it was really almost a spooky little bridge when you think about it. And then I wasn't even thinking about it, but now you look back and you're like, that could be in a horror movie. So we went up this little incline, went across these old planks, big spaces between the bottom. My grandmother first saw some light coming through the bottom of the bridge. And she didn't really comment on it that way. She just said, it looks kind of odd the way the headlights were going, so we were going through the bridge at like 8:30 at night. The headlights were, focused straight ahead, but there seemed to be this extra light. And it was odd for her. That's the first thing she realized. This comes full circle in a minute. And then when we came down the side of the bridge, we were going like 5 miles an hour because there's big potholes and stuff. And we had a big station wagon, and it was night. Go really slow. I'm like 5 miles an hour at best. And my grandmother had turned around also to look through the bridge to see what was that light. And at the same time, I was giving my brother a candy, a fireball. And she had said to me, I don't know why I remember this like it was yesterday, but he could choke. Don't give it to him. And when doing so, and she looked back past the bridge, she saw this big white sphere and was just staring at it. So we all kind of like looked as well. And sure enough, it was like a cue ball from a pool table. It was very defined, and it was putting off like a 2 or 3 watt bulb would. But what I saw, it looked crisp, and the best way to describe it, I used to say like a little light bulb, but a light bulb puts off that light.
Yeah.
It's more like a cue ball, hard, solid. I mean, it wasn't like you could see through it. It wasn't really like an orb. It was more like a sphere.
Yeah.
And we saw it rise from the banks. Some people say, oh, Tom said it came out of the water. No, I didn't. I never saw where it came from. I saw it rising from the banks. So I don't know how deep that water is. I've never gone in there, but I know it's toxic, so it's not going to be anytime soon.
Yeah.
And it rose up to about 2 or 3 stories. And then my brother, who was sitting next to me, was trying to see too, because my mom's like looking out the window, my grandmother's looking out the window, and he notices like an orange one on the right side near the water. So at first you're going, what is that? Is that a reflection? You don't really know what it is at first.
Yeah.
And we're staring at it, and the center of the orange one looked like it was moving like an ocean wave, which is how I worded it on Unsolved Mysteries. And he had the best look of that. But when we talk about this, it did. It was like swirling and turning, whereas the white one was solid. So we were between the two, right? This one rose, this one stayed at the ground. This one rose and started going down a dirt road behind a line of trees. My mother goes down maybe, I don't know, 30 yards, and there was a telephone pole where back in the day, trucks were working on the poles, so there was like an area to pull off. So she kind of just went to the right a little bit, and we were looking over the field, and that to see if we could find that white one.
Yeah.
Right? And we're looking, and we're like, you know, where is it? And all of a sudden, it was like clear as day. There was this thing about 2 or 3 stories up. It looked like a turtle shell to me, which is the way I've always worded it, because it wasn't shiny. It didn't look all cool, you know, sharp edges, you know, like it's it really looked like if you took a turtle shell, 2 of them, and put them together, because it had like these squares or blocks and lines in it. And to me, it's like a little bit of a snake, too, because Berkshires, you see snakes a lot. So it had this pattern on the outside, and the top right corner of it, the very top, not the whole thing, not underneath or the sides, just the top was putting out this red light.
Wow.
So like an amber light, or not a massive glow, but enough that it gave enough light that you could make it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm looking at it, and we're like, it's dark. This thing is also dark. It was like a pewter and a gold. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't like a silver. And it's in this dark, you know, and by the way, it was like 100 or 90 degrees that day, and so it was still very, very hot out.
Yeah.
So we had the windows rolled down, and to get a little bit of a breeze, there was no glare on the glass, or nothing. We're staring at this thing, and we never saw the white light again. However, later on, the car burst with light, so I'll get to that. So it must have come back, I guess. It might have been the same thing, which is why Ancient Aliens showed that.
Sure.
But it didn't stop our car. My mom stopped the car. So while we're looking at this, the car is running. The headlights are on. We never planned on parking and making a day of it, right? It was just to momentarily hit the brakes, put it in park for a minute, and see if we could find it, you know, where this white light was.
Yeah, yeah. Where'd that thing go?
Right. So if you look at this now, like a clock, you know, we're facing 12 o'clock. The craft that we saw, which looked like a turtle shell, if you will, was probably at 11 o'clock. The orange one back here was around 4 o'clock. And then this one, when we first saw it, would have been around, 7 o'clock. So we were in the middle of a triangle.
Wow.
So I've thought later on that maybe there was a communication between these 3, that these were working in conjunction.
Yep.
Because we started to feel like, you ever dive deep into a pool and everything's like, boop, gone. And then if somebody's tapping the side of the pool with a ring or something, it's loud. That's what it sounded like stones, tiny stones were hitting underneath our fender wall. Well, we were parked. So like in a pool.
Yeah.
And everything was muted. And we felt like, again, like my mom talks about this the most, like being like a pressure. So that's why I used the pool reference, because of this tapping sound and the pressure. For me, what I remember was almost like feeling like I was wrapped in cellophane, like I couldn't really move, and then like placid. But at the same time, I remember it's kind of like your body's frozen in a way, but you're still aware. Like I guess if you were like you're paralyzed.
Yeah, like sleep paralysis.
Maybe.
I'm a sleep paralysis sufferer, and that's kind of what it is. I will wake up, and at times, it's freaky, man. I'll still hear the sounds that I was hearing in my dream, but see the room around me and not be able to move or speak.
Wow.
And it is one of the most frightening experiences in the world. Even though I know what's happening, even though I know, right now, my brain chemistry is in a mid-drift between awake and asleep.
Like waking up in a coma.
Yeah. You can't move. You can't talk. You can't do anything. Even though I know what it is, it's still frightening to me. So I know the feeling that you're talking about, where you're conscious, you're aware, you can absorb and remember everything that's happening, but you cannot move or speak.
Yeah. That's kind of what... So we were still looking around, but it almost was surreal, I guess, the best way to word it. And my brother was to my right. My mother was driving. My grandmother was in the passenger seat. Car's still running. Lights are on. And then it was just out of nowhere, it was kind of like this, flash, which is what Ancient Aliens focused on, a boom of a light. And I remember being able to see, it wasn't like a dome light. And then here's something else, right? It was super bright, but I don't remember anyone being afraid to look at it. It wasn't like it was bothering your eyes. because we were all looking around, and if it was that blindingly bright, you would think it would bother your eyes. Although I got eye problems, I have 5 operations now, but I remember the knobs on the radio. And here's something else that I don't talk about much because it's, there's so much anyway. But Tom J, the radio personality, he was a ham radio operator. And he had gone home for dinner with his wife, and they put on the tape so they would listen to music, it replays overnight. And he had heard over his ham radio that people were spotting things in the area, mostly from Jug Inn Resort, which is in South Egremont. And so he called the police to say, well, what's going on? But most of the officers had gone home. There's just one answer on the phones. And so he said, why don't you go back? You don't mind going back to the station, or whoever's idea it was. He went back to WSBS Radio and opened up the phone lines and went to everyone in the area, because it was also a holiday. And, hey, guys, how's the holiday? This is Tom J, blah, blah, blah. By the way, we're getting reports of blah, blah, blah. If anyone sees this, could you call the station? And he called, 413, whatever the number was. And so people started calling the radio station. So we had the radio on at that time. And Tom J had interrupted. I don't remember hearing what he said. But I do know afterwards that he was asking people to report where this thing was while we were incorporating it, while we were experiencing it. Yeah, I'm sorry. No. And so with that said, this light, Grandma, Mom, I remember her hair, my mom's hair, and then all of a sudden it was just like a eruption of crickets and katydids, and the light went out, and everything came back to normal after that. So it was like the light, the flash, and then it went off, and then everything came back to what I would...
back to life.
Yeah, back to like normal sounds of nature. You know? You had the wind, you could hear the trees. So when I say it was almost like surreal, when we were experiencing whatever this was, and this is before the light hit our car. So while we were in the middle of these 3 objects is when we were the most affected. And I don't know why that was. And then when the light hit our car, I don't know what was happening at that point, but then bang, as soon as it went off, everything came back to normal.
Wow.
So it was until that light flashed that we seemed to be ourselves again, but only momentarily, and then that was the last moment I remember from being in the car. So it was almost like our bodies were affected, our minds were affected momentarily, yet we were still part of it and trying to fight it, or
still cognizant and still able to remember and recall.
Right. And then bang, it was normal again, and then boom, we were no longer in the vehicle.
Yeah, because it's not like you've ever had to go through any regression to remember any of this.
No, and I keep telling people
or anything like that.
I don't want to, because...
Are you afraid to?
Oh, God, no. But,
okay, because that was my next question. Was anybody in the car, was there an expression of fear from Mom, Grandma, any expression of concern from them for y'all?
That's something else, too.
Aside from don't give your little brother a fireball because he might choke.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, right, and whoever's watching this later on, all right? If we looked out that window and we saw something hovering there like a sphere or something, would you be scared of it, or would you just go, wow, what the, right? So it wouldn't be any different. I mean, I'd be like, Mike, what is that,
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we were. We were more like, but we had seen activity in the area before, too, because the original, report that, or the article that came out in the Berkshire Eagle, was from 2 years earlier, which is the one that solely involved our family. So we this is another thing that makes sense if you explain it, that we weren't a novice to the activity.
Yeah.
We knew there was stuff happening in the area, so we had an idea what it was, but this was the first time as a family we were going to try to figure out what it was, right? So we had seen it before, and we're like, now it's there. What is that? You're like, that's why my mom says, what is that? Like in Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah.
Because now for the first time, we were close to it. We could see it.
Yeah.
And I guess we were just trying to, as a family, come to terms with what this was.
Absolutely.
And then bang, we're out of the car. And I remember being in a holding area that was huge, nothing in it. I remember there was a light. I got grabbed like really, really hard on my left arm, and whoever it was pushing me from behind. But I wasn't super sharp. I think I just remember how it hurt.
Interesting, because that was going to be my follow-up was, did y'all have any of the typical missing time?
Oh, yeah.
Any time dilation, anything like that? And, to know that you had an actual contact experience, not just like a CE2, as they would say.
But then again,
where like you're in the physical presence of something.
I don't know what we had contact with.
Which
is why I don't take that leap and say, I was abducted by alien.
Absolutely.
Because it's not that we weren't taken, because any time you're removed, you're abducted. But the point is here, if I may,
please.
When I was taken out that door and down a hallway, what I do remember, there was times I was like some of this stuff is super clear to me. It's like I would come in and out of this state like I was in the car. One minute I'd be like, and this I'm going back because we talked about this as a family immediately because my mom was dating my father who was in law school, document everything, and he would ask my mom. He talked with us, and he actually came to my mom's rescue once in a diner because she was getting picked on afterwards about the topic. And my father, being from New York, is like, "Hey man, you want that to eat here? Or do you want it to go? Because if you're going to eat it here, you're going to shit them." You know? And my mom's like, "My hero." So that's how they met, really. But anyway, they weren't she was single at the time. My mother was 29 years old. My grandmother was, in her 50s. I was, let's say, 10. And my brother 8. And so we've always talked about this to try to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And so we do agree as a family that what we saw or where we were seemed very industrial by design. It was lefts, it was rights, it wasn't all modern or what you might think. And so we do believe that we were in a base or underground somewhere. And to, continue this moment, we were taken down this hallway, and I was brought into another room where there was a wall that bowed in like glass brick. It's the best way to describe it.
Okay.
And there were, two
like
opening,
Coke bottle glass.
Yeah, and there was an opening on the right and an opening on the left. And, I was sitting on what would be like a table, but I remember it looking like an autopsy table later on with a single pole. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And then, I remember these two figures, or I don't. Sometimes I say objects or things, or I don't know if it was uncanny valley. I don't know if it was real, robotic. If it was a living, breathing thing, but it looked like an ant and had a head of like a football. Because I used to throw the ball around. And sometimes I go back. My memories are based on a lot of the references I make too, but it was like a football. And it had dark eyes on it, a thin body. There's no way a person could be in there. And I was staring at it to think, is that a suit? Because I'm thinking, Halloween, whatever.
Space suit,
I don't
whatever.
know what's going on, and I'm trying to rationalize. And there's no way a person was in there. The neck was too thin. And so with that, it was about 4.5 feet tall. It had stick-like legs like bamboo, a head like a football. It was almost a transparent, like a fire ant.
Oh.
And I believe it had human hands. So, I don't know if this was a manufactured thing or if it was a DNA type tampering or gene type of thing. I really don't know. But I know that at that point, I think I got scared. I mean, not that I wasn't before, but then again, I was coming and going and coming. But I ran. I ran out the right side of this bowed-in wall, and I ran into a hallway which was open like an empty Walmart. I've mentioned that plenty of times because people get an idea of how big a Walmart is.
Yeah.
And there was nothing there. There was two hallways about the size of a double-lane road, one in front of me, one to the right. Like a Y came through this circle, and the part that would have drained out was like twice the size of these two hallways. And so in my head, I'm thinking to myself later on, well, maybe that was to handle the flow of traffic. You'd think that, right? Like a rotary. You come into a rotary, and that's, you drive around those, like, that reminds me of what happened then. So would it have been foot traffic? What would have been? Would it have been to take, move heavy equipment? Was this something that was underground? Was this governmental? And, but that area alone was much larger than the craft we saw, and as was the first bay I was in, or whatever it was. So people have said to me, were you on a craft? And so to pass a polygraph and to be honest with myself, which is why I don't opt to do any hypnosis, is because that's, if I were to take that leap and say, I was on a craft, then part of me is like, well, how could it have been a craft if it was bigger than the craft? So I don't want to fail a polygraph again, but I want to be true to myself. And so that's one of the reasons I don't do it. Plus, I think I remember enough anyway. So wherever I was either underground, I believe, or a base somewhere, or even maybe it was connected to the National Guard, air base that was there at the time.
Sure.
I don't know, but I can tell you this: I remember having packets put on my body, and they were black packets, and I think something was absorbing into my skin, maybe extracting something from my body, maybe both, maybe but something going on there. But they looked like raisins, like a big black raisin, and I got put back on this, table, I guess you'd call it, and this cage type thing came over me that separated into two pieces. So the first one came down, kind of like holding me in place, but yet it wasn't tight on my body. I could have probably slipped out if I was wanted to do that or wasn't in the right state of mind to do that.
Yeah.
And then the second piece came over it, and these holes lined up. And these hands came through, and that was putting these raisin-like things in my body. I know it sounds nuts.
Wow.
So it was almost like I was kind of held there. I was in my underwear, I believe. I think my underwear were on. And everything that was put on my body came from the left side through there was like 3 or 4 holes. And I remember a tap to the head. And I woke back up, if you will, woke up or however came to, or however you want to word it, in this large Bay Area. And I was on the same, I believe it was the same card or table that I had slipped off of when I was grabbed originally by the arm. And then I remember being in the car. But I was the second one to come to in the car. My grandmother was now in the driver's seat. My mother was in the passenger seat. I was behind the driver, and my brother now where he was originally.
So you'd all switch positions?
Not all of us, no. Just my mother and grandmother.
Just mother and grandmother.
And she was the first one to come to, but she didn't really drive much. And this was a station wagon. Back in the 60s, a lot of older women didn't drive much,
Sure,
you know.
yeah.
And she had a little Corvair, I think, at the time, but, you know, never drove it, you know. No need to, really. So anyway, she had started the car, had to start it to put the lights on and everything. So somehow those lights had gotten turned off, which, again, is why collectively as a family we feel that it was maybe a military thing or a governmental thing involved in what happened, because the aliens know how to turn off, you know, a Chevy key.
Yeah, they know how to operate an ignition.
Yeah. See, these are the things that why I say I can't commit to an abduction experience, because these things aren't like what other people experience. You know, it's very different.
But did your family also recall the same kind of experience in between the lights and waking that you did?
My mother, although she's gone very public, she was on Unsolved Mysteries and that kind of thing. She remembers a lot of things that obviously I wasn't privy to because it didn't happen to me, and vice versa. But very similar. Did she remember seeing an ant figure? No, she did not. My brother did. My grandmother remembers something very personal. You know, the lower, womanly. Yeah. Which is obvious because of what she did moments later in the store when she went for help. But my mother, I think she was the most traumatized. And I used to say my grandmother was in a way, but I really do. My mother's still alive to this day. I take care of her, but she's always fought it. You know, she got her master's in ministry. You know, because her children. You know, I wanted this Norman Rockwell upbringing for my family, and I don't know what happened, because this was not the first time we had an experience, and she was getting a lot of crap from people in town. And, you know, this was the third time now that we had seen something, but this was the first time we had been together when something happened like this. And I think originally when, you know, Matthew and I were coming to her with, you know, that something's wrong here, you know, Mom, what can we do? I don't think she truly understood quite what to make of it. But now, all 4 of us are, and I think my mom's mind was just blown, you know. And
well, it's enough to process your own experience, because I can't even. I've had my own paranormal experiences and my own experiences that have steeled my life. That when I've tried to explain them to people, they're like, I don't really know what to make of that.
So imagine if you had children.
Exactly.
And they're going, Daddy.
And you've got
what's going, and they're grabbing your arm like I was my grandmother.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know what to say.
Yeah, because she doesn't even know how to process her own experience that she just had, much less the one that you're telling her.
Her mind's not there.
Yeah.
Yet. And that's exactly how it was. And,
yeah.
And it's been like that for a while. Although it's lots
cleared
cleared
up. And to know, especially your mom, especially if, you know, she has any kind of really, really close connection with her mother, you know, that not only is she dealing with her experience and the experience of her children, but she's dealing with the obvious, very traumatic experience that your grandmother had too.
Yeah, she's in the middle. She's got children.
Exactly.
Looking for help, and now her mother, who she would normally go to for help, is also
looking for help.
Right.
Exactly.
And she was 29, man. Can you imagine?
And it is not the modern day and age at all where, hey, let's all go out and seek some family therapy, something like that, despite the fact talking about it and discussing it.
And on top of that, the article that I showed you from
Wow.
1967 about
Yeah.
her family, the original article.
Yeah.
She had already gone 2 years getting hassled
Yep.
at the diner and
Yeah, at
followed in her
work
car, and
totally.
so I think this was just too much. And so to answer your question more directly, yeah, she remembers an awful lot of things happening, but she doesn't really remember the ant type thing so much.
Sure.
But my grandmother,
But you all had like that visceral experience of being removed from the vehicle.
oh no, she remembers things happening to her.
Wow.
But not that particular. She remembers
Wow.
like we've talked over the years, and I don't know how to word it. Maybe like a hybrid type of human being, like the bald, smaller, not a
Sure.
gray-looking thing, but almost just like I guess like a hybrid would look.
Sure.
That kind of thing. And like I said, my brother also had a club foot, so he remembers a lot of attention being put on his club foot. That's something he always remembered.
Wow.
And so with that, when we got back in the car, I don't know how much time I got, but when we got back in the car.
Take your time.
Yeah? Okay.
Take your time.
All right. So it's not like I got a speaker coming up after
No,
me.
no.
So, all right. So we've got the experience wherever this was. I don't believe it was the craft. I really don't. I believe it was that there was government involved.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to recap this. There was Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky Aircraft, Sprague
Oh,
Electric.
Sikorsky is huge up in that area.
Yeah,
huge.
And people don't realize this. A lot of people don't realize that NASA was in Massachusetts in 1969.
Yep.
They were the ones getting the money from the government to beat Russia to space.
Yeah.
They were the ones filtering it out to Pratt & Whitney. Like I said, Sikorsky, General Electric, an electric boat over there.
Yeah.
And Sprague Electric was in, right up the road.
Yeah.
GE.
Yep.
And so you were surrounded by manufacturing facilities that were contracted by the government.
Yeah,
So
and these
the place
were
was swarming with government.
and these were deep government contractors. Some of these were contractors
Big
back
money
to
contractors
and back
with-
to the day
who
of
had demands because they had to go to the moon and beat them. And on top of that, though,
they were also contractors. When you're talking about people like GE, they were directly involved with the Manhattan Project and things
Yeah.
like that. So when you're talking about compartmentalized black money,
Do you realize that they were 20 minutes from our diner?
yeah,
So picture this now, too. Also, they weren't just using that money to go to space. They were using some of that money for make weapons,
sure,
experimental weapons.
they bring good bombs to life.
All right. I'm going to write that down. It was pretty well worded. So with respect to that, right, you also had the spill in Canaan, the mining for the magnesium for the
Yep.
atom bomb. Then you had Nike missile sites, Minuteman missile sites, and in Dalton, even to this day, is where the NORAD tower sits.
Yeah,
So you tell me there wasn't government swarming that place. So how could government be that,
yeah,
was
out of tune or tone deaf
yeah,
to what's going on?
if they were, that would really be sad, right?
It would be.
Right. So they had to be involved. They had to know something was up. And what I think we were at the wrong place at the wrong time kind of thing. And I've always thought that until I really realized that we had 3 experiences. We're all, Rh negative, I'm O negative. And back in the 60s, O negative blood was the only blood tracked by the U.S. government because of war.
Because of its rarity.
And we could give our blood to anybody.
Yeah.
So government was swarming the area. They were making weapons. They were making all kinds of stuff. NASA was there. We're trying to beat Russia to space. They're gathering information on humans anyway back then because they want to know what kind of blood types they have. So if we go to war, we can donate blood. And they're seen coming out of the woods. And you had, like I said, the NORAD tower. There was a lot going on. Yet you're only an hour and 50 minutes outside of Manhattan.
Yeah.
So, and it had high elevation with no fly zones at the time, here and there. And so for me to rule out the government was involved in our incident, I think would be ignorant. So that's why I say what I do. Now, when my grandmother got in the car and she turned it around because no one was responding to her, according to her, she went back to Silk's store, which is in Sheffield, Massachusetts, which is right next to our diner. So she pulled up. She actually drove by the first entrance, and she had come back around. So when she opened her door, the entrance was right there. She didn't have to walk around the car. And when she got out and the door slammed, I think that's when I came to, because by the time I saw my grandmother, she was about 15 feet in front of the windshield, but I could see her out the windshield, and she was going into the inside the front door of Silks. But when she went in there and I followed her in, she walked right past the clerk and kept going. and ended up behind the strollers and the bikes because it was a convenience store of all types,
Yeah, yeah.
Had everything in
Sundry store.
there. Yeah, yeah. And so that's when I was grabbing her shirt and going, Nana, Nana, because I was following her, and then I couldn't reach her because she was behind this line of stuff, and I was scared. I didn't know what to make. I wouldn't say scared. I was just not able to comprehend what was going on.
Yeah.
And I just, I needed guidance. I needed some help. I needed, and I kept grabbing her, and then she grabbed, like a baby carriage, and she started pushing it back. And that's when I knew that's, later on when I looked back and talked to her about, or used to talk to her about what happened, that really sold it for me when she said it was very personal, And anyway, so the clerk, knew us because we were right next door to them. That's where our diner was, and the car. And he came out to talk to her, and she never, really said anything. She didn't. I know she went there for help, but when she got there, she didn't know what to ask for help for. There was no paramedics, no cops came. Now, whether he reported it or not, I don't know, but I do know that the Sheffield police were dispatched to go look for it. Eddie Galata, who's still alive today, who owns the Exxon station or Mobil, I don't know which one it is, in town, he actually went out with his father looking for this thing because...
Looking for the object.
Yeah, because Tom J. had gotten back on the air, and the police were now involved. But the Sheffield police, not the Great Barrington police, which is Unsolved Mysteries, focused on the Great Barrington police more, and they shouldn't have because they had nothing to do with it. The sightings were over Sheffield. And so with that, we got back in a car, not unaware at the time that police were even dispatched, went home, came to the diner the next morning, and that's when we heard the recordings from the night prior on our radio that was up over near the stoves.
The people reporting the object.
Yeah, they had called in, he recorded it, replayed them, and now people in our diner were like, that's Jim, that's so-and-so. But something else, too, during this time, or right around this time, you couldn't talk about, what was going on or about UFOs because there were secret space programs being, in the middle of the waning hours, if you will, of the space program, and they were secret programs. So if you worked for Sprague or you worked for GE, you couldn't say, yeah, we're working on this or we're working on...
Yeah.
Right. And so when we would talk about it in the diner, you'd also get, people would get upset. You can't talk about that. My grandmother works there. My sister works there.
Yeah, yeah.
But us being New Yorkers and moving there only a couple years earlier, we didn't know what we moved into. So my mom would say, you can talk about whatever you want in here. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. You didn't realize the intricacies of the intertwined politics of the area.
So my mother being 29 and not being able to get advice from her mother because she was as mess as she was, and then trying to find some a way for her kids to come to terms with everything. She started relying on those who came into the diner. And that's when they started picking on my mom on top of it. And so my mom, if you're in church, right, and you say, I'm talking to God, that's fine. But you don't say that in Walmart. So our diner became the hub for conversation. And because we were open to it, because, we were part of it, but we also knew that what was said in there would be kept quiet. And so later on, when it got inducted into state, it was really our diner that had shown to alter the natural progression of the community. And because of that, like Billy the Kid altered the railroad, the event later on became deemed historically true. Yeah. But it also went to the UN. I don't know if I got time here.
Sure, yeah. We got a few more minutes.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about how this incident, and number one of the many topics that we've talked about over the last few months is the other side of experiences. So many people are like, man, what I wouldn't give to have an experience like what Tom's had. Really? You sure? Because like you're saying, your mom had a pretty rough go of it. When you talk about Betty and Barney Hill, Kathleen Martin's family, they had a rough go of it, so much so that Betty told Kathleen, this ever happens to you, don't ever tell anybody. And that's just it, that see something, say nothing, even amongst families. The fact that you and your family discussed it and talked about it openly is pretty incredible to begin with. But what was the aftermath for your family before proclamation by a state, and before the beginning, which we'll get into
we
a
got more
minute.
documents than that, too. But
Oh,
yeah.
sure, but
Yeah.
but of the UFO park that you have now done in memoriam of your father and of the incident, those things come of it many, many years later, but there are decades
Yeah.
between those two.
Oh, my God, yeah.
And the aftermath for your family, what was that?
Well, all right. So spiritually, we divided. You know, I was like, used to be an altar boy. I was like, okay, this is nonsense. There's a bigger picture out there. My mom was the one who got her master's in ministry because she was struggling with her beliefs and what she thought. So, and my grandmother, you know, oddly enough, afterwards, my grandmother kind of raised us. You know, my mom was.
Did she just kind of check out, or?
No, she stopped going to the diner. She let my grandmother run it, and we had a cook who was a second in charge now, and she ended up working for a dentist. She became a dental assistant.
Oh.
And but she had enough of Sheffield, if you will.
Yeah. Of the talk.
Yeah, she didn't even want to go into town anymore because, you know,
It's a small town, man.
Right.
It's a small town, and word gets around.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, we were like
I mean,
the talk of town.
word's not going to be around.
Right.
It's not going to not be
So
around.
she got to the point where she didn't want to drive down that road.
Yeah.
You know, she did not want to open that door anymore.
Yeah.
It killed her. It destroyed my mother.
That's
And,
horrible to hear, man. I'm sad to hear that.
Yeah, she was in tough shape. But Howard, who she met, who stuck up for her, you know, she would later, you know, marry. So she started looking for a new house, and we moved to Great Barrington. And so we left Sheffield. And in doing so, we're now a new town, but still people knew who we were. But it wasn't.
Sure.
It was a little different attitude, you know. And so we kept our mouths shut for a while. And then one day my mom said, "What do you want for your birthday?" And I was like, "I want a camera." And because if I ever see this again, I want to get a picture of it. And, of course, I became a fashion photographer in South Beach and all that. So my career would have not gone the direction it did if I hadn't had this experience.
Sure.
However, I would say that the off-world was much worse than the on-world because, I'm sorry, the other
The
way around.
on-world.
The on-world, yeah, because, you know, the off-world thing was trying because there was a lot of confusion there.
Sure.
And it was tough to deal with, but at the same time, it was the kids, it was the picking, the fights, and
The ridicule.
yeah.
Yeah.
But a couple things again I don't mention. A lot of the kids in school were drawing what they saw, and they were taping these things to the chalkboard. So my fourth grade class, you had all these pictures and drawings of what all these other children saw. So I also know that a lot of those other kids experienced something very similar to us.
Yeah.
And probably why now that they're older, they support us.
Yeah.
And they came together to say this really happened. They don't want to say they experienced it, but they did. Otherwise, they wouldn't have drawn all those things. And our bus driver, you know, was a witness to it. And people were talking about it on the bus. I mean, the school bus, the kids, it was mostly the kids, but the grown-ups, they had these careers at these, either you shucked corn and milked cows, or you worked, you know, for one of these manufacturing facilities that has some serious backing.
That was out building ships or what have you.
You couldn't talk about it, but your kid was part of it. So the kid was told to shut up, but he drew it in school. So what happened with the diner is that you had a division now of children. My mom became like their surrogate mother when she would stop into the diner to check on things, make the night deposit drop, you know, drain a change out of the jukebox.
Yeah.
All these other kids would be there, and she'd, you know, give them a basket of fries for free. You know, give them some quarters because she'd take them right out of the jukebox.
Yeah.
But
You're going to get them right back.
Right. So she became like this surrogate mom for the kids who had experiences. And one of those kids was Judge Titus, who sealed the document right here.
Yep.
By the, you know, he's a judge in the 30th District Court.
Yeah.
But if she hadn't been so nice to him when we got older, he wouldn't have sealed that. So a lot of this came full circle, you know.
Yeah.
But before we went to, before this went to the United Nations Symposium, you know, there was a lot of heat on the family. We were kind of forced to leave. She sold an 80-acre horse farm.
Wow.
Sold the diner. It's now owned by this guy. It's Roberto's, who also, when you go in, he's going to make like a UFO pizza.
Okay.
You know, and so things turned out, as you know, with the park and everything.
Yeah.
It really, right now we're at a point where it's kind of like, oh, thank God, you know, we stuck together, we never wavered, and
that's beautiful.
Together as a community, we made history. But now you're faced with, well, we've got this park now that, you know, is backed by, you know, the family of B.B. King, the Roswell Museum. Ben Hansen, Travel Channel,
Yeah.
The family of Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yep.
And then we're like, wow, you couldn't, dream to have this happen. And now because it's become a tourist attraction, now we're back to the same bunch of problems or people that want to now take ownership of it and rename it the Berkshire's UFO, not the Reed family incident, and then put ice cream trucks in there because you can't.
Yeah, make it into a food park, and
So now we got another set of battles, right?
Yeah,
and that's unfortunate because when my father lost his life he lost his life on the same day this was mentioned at the United Nations Symposium, but on the anniversary of it.
Yeah.
The park and the respect and the investigation that went into it from the state was because of who he was, and they looked further. They focused more on this than they would have if it was somebody who just worked at the dollar store.
Yeah.
Right. It was his past is what they wanted.
Yeah.
What warranted that kind of investigation
and that kind of
right.
credo to it.
Right. And so now, after we finally accomplished something that I think is a beautiful thing to pay tribute to him.
Yeah.
Now there's certain people that want to take possession of our park.
Well, and
so there's a point where you go, come on,
you
man.
can't. Yeah, you can't win for losing.
Yeah, that's kind of how it feels to me. So sometimes we're like, why do we bother? You know?
And it's such an incredible story.
Look at the monument. We got the monument, and then they took it, and they're the ones who put it there and said in the papers that we put it there just to hurt us, our credibility. And so that way when they took it over, slam you a little bit, put you down, and then, make a couple lies, run it in the paper, and then when they take it over, it's like, oh, I'm glad you did because, right.
Somebody had to do it. Yeah.
So
wow. Wow.
Right, you know what I mean?
I want to thank you for coming on, sharing your incredible story. Because it is one of those that should be researched more and more and more, especially the experiences that you remember.
Thanks.
Between the lights. And tell everybody where they can go to support the park, where they can go to find out more about the park, to visit, where they can go to keep track of you, to keep track of everywhere that you're going to appear, and all that kind of good stuff. It's time for shameless self-promotion at the end of the show.
Okay. All right, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So I hold my own conferences too. It's UFOXpo, so it's UFOXpo.com, and that's going to be in St. Augustine, Florida, October 1st and 2nd of this year. Ben Hansen, Travis Walton, Mike Barra, Tracy Tomei, quite a lot of people going to be. Kathleen Martin, I believe. I just invited her today. And if you're interested in following what's going on with this case or the park, it's ufopark.org. And my personal email is thomasereed.com. Okay. And so you need to reach us. It's the ufopark@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have, your viewers have. And, thanks again for the friendship. And thanks again. He bought me a freaking breakfast sandwich today. So it was actually a good sandwich.
As a traveling AV technician, we say all the time, it's one of those, like, we live off scraps. I have a whole section of my other podcast, Talking Sound, called Secret Snacks, where it's like, so I'm in the back hallway of this convention center. I found these snacks on the table. Let's check them out.
Well, that was an $18 breakfast sandwich.
Sometimes, as a technician, that's the lunch we get. Like, they literally eat 3 plated meals in front of us all day while we're running their show and feed us nothing.
And you're getting fries and Jello.
And they're like, what's this meal penalty about? I'm like, it was 14 hours with no meal break. Yeah. That's a long time, guy. Yeah. So,
and again, that was like an $18 freaking couple eggs on and a wrap. Thanks for the share.
No worries, my friend. I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for everything that you have done to bring more awareness to these things and to be there as an experiencer, to share your experience. Because every time somebody shares their experience, more people come forward with their experiences.
Yeah, I hope so.
So it's because of people like you that the doors have been opened for future generations of experiencers. Thank you so much for everything.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much.